Hey you guys, welcome back. This week has been a rough one. It seems that everything that I ordered to get this thing going as far back as 2 weeks ago hasn't arrived or got screwed up somehow on what I ordered. I just have no idea how this happens to me all the time. Earl also says it's just the same for him. The only company I can say that followed through and always does me right is CIP1. And I'm not just saying that because they're the sponsor of Gregory the Bus, but rather because it's true. Now, I can't say the same for their carrier though. DHL got a local delivery driver and has done nothing but screw things up. The idiot just kept trying to deliver it beyond the business hours at my mailbox location. The folks over at 2B Postal, great people by the way, were rather distraught when they told me that a new driver finally arrived over there. Somehow the idiot also managed to input some data into the tracking that was in the future after I had already picked up my package. It claimed that it was held for me. Can you explain that? I just don't get it. Anyway, my parts finally arrived yesterday, on Thursday, really late after 6 p.m., over a week past the date that I expected them. That made my video late this week, of course. Upon opening the box, I found that CIP1 got my order 100% correct, so at least there's that. They have had a 100% accuracy rate on all of my orders, unlike the other parts that I've had to order from other vendors, which sadly I can't get from them. I wish CIP1 folks opened a wider service, like an Amazon, you know. Well, check out their website, CIP1.com. And I'm not being paid or pushed to say that. These guys actually are really good. So the big part that was holding everything up was this front transmission mount. I found my pan was missing one, and I don't know what happened to this pan before I got it, but the mount wasn't there. Mounting of this part will allow me not only to get the transaxle mounted properly, but will also allow me to mount the engine, then properly fit a shifter shaft in the correct length. Without this, none of that can happen. This part was truly the key component to this video. Well, I needed to see where the transmission mount was to be situated, so I flipped the pan over. I discovered that the floor pan was so much closer to the ground because of the 13-inch wheels that my orange pole couldn't get into the chassis well enough, so I rolled up one of the back wheels onto a ramp. This seemed to do the job as I got the pole underneath and flipped the bitch right over. It's amazing just how heavy this thing is, even though it's so small. It doesn't help things that the wheels are so much wider either. It makes the thing just so much heavier for me to lift it. I lose a ton of leverage when I roll it over. You know, I did think it was getting away from me there for a moment, as I expected the ATV frame to be the weight to pull it over. But to my surprise, it did not. It's more stable than I expected to be, so we're good to go. So here's the remains of the nose cone mounts. They need to be cut off and removed so that the new mount can be affixed in place. So I got to cutting and grinding the old nose cone mount remnants right out of their place. I've got this nose cone rubber mount from a fan of mine a couple years ago who intended it for Ruby, but sadly it's the wrong part for a Type 3. But it's the right part for this job, so we're going to use it here. So I went and looked at my transaxles and found that two had the correct nose cone mount. The first one is a swing axle and wrong for the setup. The second one was a later model and had a 3-bolt rubber mount that just won't fit. And the last one was the correct IRS transmission with a damaged nose cone mount. The holes are just all wallowed out. So I pulled the nose cone mount from the first transmission and swapped it onto the last one. This combination gave me what I needed and I brought it over to the ATVW. From CIP1 I also received some rear transaxle mounts. They were very important as this indexes where the transmission is going to sit so I can properly set the location of the front transaxle mount. They go in pretty easily, and it's amazing to me how small all of this hardware is. Just a bunch of 13mm bolts to hold the engine and transmission combination. Imagine that. So I threw the chassis back down on its wheels. I often catch some hell for people for doing this as they think it's going to bend or damage the chassis. I ask if they think that this would be more or less violent than an impact while running a fully loaded Volkswagen Beetle through a pothole at 60 miles per hour. Yeah, think you guys. Really, think. I mounted the chassis mount to the rubber mount and right up to the transaxle. I also ordered a proper rubber gogi to seal the nose cone up against the chassis. So it was time to mount the transmission. I got it into place, then began to install the rear bolts. I got a jack underneath to push the nose cone mount up against the chassis, then used the crowbar to gently align the shifter shaft so that it was centered in the tunnel. This looked good to me, so I began to tack it in a few places so it just wouldn't move. I flipped the chassis over yet again. This time so I had access to weld the nose cone mount into its correct position. The chassis is a lot heavier now with the transmission in place, let me tell you what. Wow. With the transmission in it, it was a bit top heavy and wanted to roll over, but believe it or not, sticking this pole in place was all it really needed to counteract that balance. So I got to welding the right side of the mount. It looked good to me, but I figured I need to hit it from the other side, but not until I've had a break. Alright, well, that transmission is in. Turned out to be a lot easier than I thought. The front mount, I didn't expect it to be cut very well, and it wasn't. There were a lot of spots that I had to bridge the gap with the welds, and as such, I'm going to flip it up the other way and hit it from the other side. But, it's break time. So, salut! Lemon lime soda and whiskey. A little something different from the usual rum and cola. But I needed it. And before this, I actually filled this up with water and downed that. Otherwise, I would have put this down too fast, and then I'd be drunker than shit before I finished the job. So I flipped the pan back over the other way. Oh, God, I'm tired. Doesn't help that I'm drunk either. And I got to welding the left side of the mounts. Let's drop that pan back down on all four. Oh, chassis is ruined! Oh no! The transmission is now officially mounted properly. This is a huge step in the right direction. Let's see if I can get that engine in there next. This over here is Gregory's engine. It's been pretty well covered from the elements, but it did turn over at one point and seems to be stuck right now. I don't know what happened, but it's stuck, so we'll deal with that later. It's never really got wet to speak of, but I think I might be able to free it. But if that isn't easy to do, well, then I'll just replace it with something else. But let's just give this a shot for now. It's just a mock-up anyway, so let's see if it all fits the way I want it. I realized because of the design of this ATVW, it would be easier to move the chassis to the engine instead of the other way around. So I only moved the engine a short distance, then pushed the chassis right up to it. I found that the transmission had a late model throwout bearing, but the engine had an early style pressure plate. This combination won't work without problems, but the pressure plate is easily modified. I just knocked the center ring off, and unfortunately I did it off camera. The rearmost engine tin wasn't going to fit either and isn't attached anyway, so away it goes. I then pulled the chassis right up to the engine and hoped for a proper mate. It actually worked quite well, and I got a couple of the engine mount bolts tightened and removed the engine jack completely. Well, let's get a good look at all this mess. This thing is just rather amazing to me, and it's coming together so quickly. But just for grins, let's throw on the plastics and see how she looks. Now before some idiot comes about and shouts, "Those plastics are gonna block your fan intake!" Yeah, you're right, but I'm only in the mock-up stage of this build anyway, and I probably won't be using any of these plastics. I'm a little upset that the Foreman tool trunk can't be used as it hits the fan shroud, but I guess I can redesign it somehow and make it work. But I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Pretty much as I expected, it looks like a boat engine hanging off a transom. Well, that's it for this week. More to come. Hopefully I can get that engine freed up and running. Next, I'll start testing some things like more weight bias compensation to the front, shifter linkage requirements, and I still need to figure out the brakes on this thing, but I think I might have a plan for that. So please, everyone, licky, like it, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to plug that dingle belly. That way you get updates every time I upload a video. And don't forget to check out duckshit.net for all of my different social media links. And not just my social media links, but you also find Bee's and Ashlyn's social media links there just the same. Everybody, thanks for watching so much, and hopefully we'll be back with this thing next week. We'll see you then.